Hi everyone, I'm Nothomb. Welcome to another video. It's Tuesday again, so I'm going to talk about the books that I read last week. I actually finished quite a few books, but the first one I want to talk about is one that I DNF'd, and that is a Dutch book, a Dutch classic by Willem Frederik Hermans, and it is The Donkere Kamer van Damocles. My copy is a book that also includes another book of him, which is Nooit meer slapen. And The Donkere Kamer van Damocles translates to The Dark Room of Damocles. A couple of weeks ago, I already started to read another Dutch classic from the second part of the 20th century that I DNF'd because I didn't like it, which was De Avonden by Gerard Reven, The Evenings. This was going to be the book that I was going to finish from a Dutch classic author from that era. And yet again, it was not my cup of tea at all. This book starts just before the Second World War starts, and it's about a young man that, when he is young, loses his father because his mother murdered him. He then goes to live with his uncle, starts a relationship with his cousin, then moves back to his parental home, and there he meets a young man that resembles him a lot, and because of that physical connection they have, he starts doing whatever that man asks of him, and because of that starts to play a role in the resistance. This was yet again such a bland way of writing. Everything was grey, everything was the same, there was no emotion whatsoever. So I figured there are a lot of books about the Second World War out there. I don't need this one. So I DNF'd yet another Dutch classic book. I think I'm going to try something else than authors from the second part of the 20th century, because apparently they are not working for me. A book that I did finish that was about the Second World War is an audiobook that I listened to, and it is How We Disappeared by Jing-Jing Lee. We follow two characters in that book. One is an older woman who, when her husband dies, decides she wants to learn more about what happened to him before she met him, because she doesn't know anything about and there is something mysterious about him, because every year on the 12th of February he disappears. And we also follow her a couple of decades before, when she talks about her life during the Japanese occupation of Singapore, and how at one point she is taken away from her family and is forced to become a sex slave in a so-called comfort house, and what that meant. The other storyline is that of a young boy who, when his grandmother dies, uncovers a secret about his father not actually being the son of his grandmother, and he goes to look for what happened to his father when he was a child. I really like this book. I could really feel the suffering of the characters, and I really like the setting and the writing, so I'd recommend you reading it if you're interested in what happened in, for example, Singapore when they were occupied by the Japanese during the Second World War. I also finished the non-fiction book The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down by Heamin Sunim. I already talked about this a little bit. It's a book that has different themes. For each theme, the author first writes about his own experience with that subject, then there are a few inspiring quotes, then another essay, and then another inspiring quotes, and there are also some very cute drawings in between. This is not the type of book that I would read for myself, and it's not the type of the book that you just sit down and take to. I think it works better when you know what subjects are in here, and when you struggle with one of the subjects, for example, the future or life, then you can read what Heamin Sunim has to say about that topic, and it will somehow help to find a bit of rest and a new perspective on it. For me, the first chapter was very helpful actually, and it talks about rest and rest in your mind, and how to sometimes just breathe and allow emotions to be, and not necessarily to put a label on emotions, but just kind of wallow in them and feel what you feel and just let your thoughts be. So that was actually very helpful, and all of those inspirational quotes were also very helpful, and I'm hoping that I'll remember this book at later stages in my life so I can go back to it when necessary. I'm not an expert in any of these self-help books, so I have no idea how it compares to other, but I really liked the tone of it, the main message being just accept who you are and go with the flow. And I also really liked the drawings, and a part of me wants to just take them out of the book and hang them up because they are kind of cute. Next, I finished a French book. I went to the library and picked up 2 French books from a favorite author of mine, Amélie Nothomb. Her favorite book of mine is Hygiène d'Assassin, which is wonderful, and I don't really know what it's been translated to. And this is Riquet à la Houppe, and it has been translated in English to Happy End, which does not correspond to this title. I don't actually really know what Riquet à la Houppe is. Apparently it's a reference to one of the fairy tales by Charles Perrault. This book is about 2 characters who are completely different, and we meet them when they are born. The first is a boy who's called Déodat, and he is apparently very, very ugly. And when people see him, they are shocked. But Déodat is very, very small. He already starts talking, and by talking I mean already with complicated sentences, when he is 13 months old. And when he grows up, he finds out that he doesn't really like relationships with other people because other people are not very interesting. But he is fascinated by birds and becomes an ornithologist. And on the other hand, we have Trémière. She is beautiful, but not very intelligent. She's very quiet and very observative and is kind of slow, and she ends up becoming a model. I liked reading about these 2 characters that have completely different starting points, but somehow they're still being parallels in their lives because both have difficulty making relationships. And I very much like Amélie Nouthomb's writing style. This wasn't a very special book, but it was still an entertaining little book to just read in one day. And like the English title said, it does have a happy ending. The last book that I finished yesterday is La Vérité sur l'affaire Harry Quebert, which has been translated to The Truth About the Harry Quebert Affair, and it was written by Joël Dicker. Joël Dicker is a Swiss author. I've had this book on my shelves for a while, and I've been meaning to read it for 6 years already, so I'm happy I finally got to it. It's a thriller, and the main character is Marcus Goldman, who has finished writing his first book and is now facing writer's block, and his one and only friend and mentor, Harry Quebert, who is an older writer, is accused of having murdered a 15-year-old girl a couple of decades before that. And Marcus Goldman had learned previously from Harry Quebert that Harry Quebert had a relationship with the 15-year-old girl at the time. However, Goldman is persuaded that Harry Quebert is innocent, so therefore he starts to do some research. Now, this is a thriller, and it's a long one, and I don't usually read thrillers because what I don't like with thrillers is that everything just happens very fast and there isn't enough depth. So I enjoyed this being longer because it meant we could stay longer with the characters and there was more happening and the story had more depth to it. It was a very entertaining read. It read really quickly. This copy is 800 pages and I read it in, I think, 5 days. And I especially liked the beginning when we got to know everybody, and the ending is also very good. But there is a part in the middle that just feels very long and there isn't a lot happening. And that is also when I noticed how much I dislike Joël Dicker's writing. This was originally written in French, but to me it felt so badly written that I think I checked maybe 4 or 5 times if it hadn't been originally written in English and then this was just a bad translation, because I could have accepted that. But no, it was apparently purposefully written this way. The characters all feel the same, they all talk in the same way. The whole book feels like, you know, you've got these police drama show things like CSI Miami, and this just felt like one very, very long CSI Miami, where everybody just felt the same, and you knew that the first person that was accused of the murder wouldn't be it wouldn't be the second, it wouldn't be the third, etc., etc. It would just be at the very end that you would understand it. And I would have liked, especially because of how thick it is, to have more depth in the characters. I would have liked them at least to feel somewhat different from one another, but the end kind of made up for it, and I think the last 200, 250 pages I just read in one sitting because I was so enthralled by what was happening. So I have mixed feelings about this. If you like thrillers, this is obviously one you should read. But if you like something that is more literary, then I'm not sure you should give this a go. Those were the 5 books I have to talk about, and I've recently started The Guernesey Literary and Potato Peel Society by Mary Ann Schaefer and Annie Barrows. This is a reread. I read it the first time, I think 5 to 6 years ago, and I really loved it at the time. I'm now halfway through and I'm really loving it a second time, but you'll have to wait till next week to hear what it's about and what I think. As always, tell me if you've read any of these books, tell me what you've been reading. I'll talk to you in the comments. Thank you for watching. Bye!